Lawmakers in the UK are voting on a truly historic Brexit trade agreement that looks to finally solidify the country's economic split from the European Union. EU officials signed the treaty in Brussels earlier this morning. British lawmakers will now debate and vote on the measure, hoping to pass the deal by tomorrow night. That's when the transition period officially ends. This all comes nearly a year after the UK actually left the EU, but it's taken negotiators months to hash out a trade agreement to prevent Britain from falling into an economic crisis through a potential no-deal situation. Prime Minister Boris Johnson spoke earlier as Parliament began debating the bill.
In the heart of this bill is one of the biggest free trade agreements in the world. As we've discussed in this chamber many times, Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive Canada-style deal worth over £660 billion, which, if anything, should allow companies to do even more business with our European friends, safeguarding millions of jobs and livelihoods in our UK and across the continent. In less than 48 hours, we will leave the EU single market and the customs union as we promised, and yet British exporters will not face a sudden thicket of trade barriers, but rather, for the first time in the history of EU agreements, zero tariffs and zero quotas.
Boy, he sounds confident. Let's bring in BBC News political correspondent Chris Mason. He's in London right now. Thanks so much for joining us, Chris. Can you start by explaining how significant this trade deal really is, what's in it, and how will things change for Britain under the new agreement?
Yeah, hello to you. It's a really big moment, this, in the UK, because for the last 4 years or so there has been this torturous, angry argument here ever since the referendum back in 2016, in which the UK voted to leave the European Union, this club that it had been a member of for a generation since the 1970s. Now, legally, the UK did leave the EU back at the end of January, so the best part of a year ago. But there was then what was known as this transition period, where whilst the country had legally left, in practical terms, save for politicians no longer going to the summits in Brussels, nothing had really changed. So there was a very short window of 11 months to try and do a trade deal that would set out the basis for how the UK trades with its nearest neighbours for the future, for the next generation. That's been sorted in the last couple of days, but for it to be legally enforced, then it has to be signed off by both sides. And what's happening here right now in the British House of Commons is members of Parliament are voting on that deal that the British Prime Minister secured.
Well, they are voting. So is it expected to pass?
Yeah, so it has just cleared the House of Commons. That's the elected chamber, those green benches that you may occasionally see on the television. The deal passing the House of Commons in the last couple of minutes, in fact, by 521 votes to 73. So an overwhelming majority for this deal. Why? Well, the governing Conservative Party are very happy with it. But crucially, the main opposition party, the Labour Party, many of whom were deeply, deeply sceptical about Brexit over the last 4 or 5 years. Their leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has said, look, Labour MPs should back this. Labour took a big, big hit at the general election here a year ago, and quite a lot of that was down to plenty of traditional Labour voters, frankly, thinking that their party of old had deserted them on Brexit and didn't really get why so many people had voted for the UK to leave the European Union. So there is support from the Labour Party for this deal as well. Opposition, though, for the Scottish National Party. That's the party that would like to see Scotland become independent from the rest of the UK. The next stage is that it heads to the House of Lords, the red benches, the appointed upper chamber. They are likely to pass it as well. And then the final thing that will happen, British tradition this, is that the bill, the planned new bit of law, heads to the Queen and receives what is known as royal assent. And it's not until Her Majesty's signature is on that bill that it becomes an Act of Parliament and will allow the UK to leave the economic structures of the European Union, the single market and the customs union at 11 o'clock tomorrow night, midnight Brussels time, 11 o'clock London time, and so enter this very new and very different relationship with the European Union.
So step one, we completed today, but there's still a lot to go. It's been a vigorous process, too, since the Britons voted to leave the EU in 2016, as you were just talking about. But I have to ask you, what's been the reaction from people and politicians there in the UK to these latest developments and some of the developments to come?
I think it kind of breaks down into two things. There are some people in the UK who have always thought that Brexit was a terrific idea and have been deeply irritated, frankly, by how long it has taken to be delivered. There are others who think Brexit is a historic mistake, that the UK has made a colossal error of judgment and will be never shifted from that perspective. There is then, I suspect, quite a big chunk of people who perhaps were, if not indifferent to the whole thing, then not a particularly strong view either way back in 2016, but became of strong view in the 4.5 years since, because frankly they were just sick of people like me droning on about it the whole time. The one thing, there are very, very, very few things you can say on the upside about this horrific pandemic that we're living through, but it stopped lots of people like me talking non-stop about Brexit for all of this year, and I suspect quite a lot of people, once we get into 2021, the rows will still go on the margins, of course, but I suspect quite a lot of people here in the UK will be just mighty glad that they never hear that B word ever again.
I don't think you're droning on and on. I love the accent. I could talk to you all day. We could talk about Brexit all day long. You know, one of the things we're watching very closely here in the United States with this deal is how it will impact trade in the United States. We have a new president-elect, Joe Biden, that's going to be coming into office. He's long opposed Brexit. I have to ask, what's Britain's plan moving forward when it comes to making a deal, in your mind, with the Biden administration?
It's such a good question, that, yeah, because there was a real personal chemistry between President Trump and Boris Johnson, and we know the scepticism, as you say, of President-elect Biden as far as Brexit is concerned. And frankly, there was a bit of a reset here in London when it became clear that Joe Biden was going to be your next president, about how the government here should handle its relationship with Washington, because it was going to be very different from how it might have been with a second term for President Trump, with all of the talk that President Trump gave to the idea of a quick and big UK-US trade deal. And the expectation now here is that perhaps it won't be quite the priority for the new president that it could have been for the soon-to-be outgoing one. So it's going to be fascinating how the politics of Brexit play out in terms of the UK's relationship with some of its closest allies, not least the United States, as it tries to forge this new, what has always been pretty awkward relationship with the European Union when the UK was within it, and I suspect to a degree will continue to be a little awkward relationship now it's on the outside.
I usually use complicated relationship. I kind of like awkward relationship. I'm going to start using that more often. Before I let you go, you had the breaking news that the House has passed. Can you just take us through one more time what's next in the post-Brexit process, the very next step and when it could happen?
Yeah, so here's what happens over the next couple of days. The Act having, or the bill having passed the House of Commons, goes to the revising chamber, the upper chamber in the UK, which is the House of Lords. The aim, certainly as far as the British government is concerned, is that it will be signed off by them late tonight. Then it will head to the Queen so that she can grant it royal assent. That's a formality, but it does have to happen. And that will then mean at 11 o'clock tomorrow night, New Year's Eve, midnight in Brussels, so the dawn of 2021 on the continent of Europe, the UK will no longer be a member of those big economic structures of the European Union that it was still in the transition period, and a new relationship between the UK and its nearest neighbours, the kind of which we've not seen in a generation. So a really big moment, even if plenty of people here, as I say, will be quite glad that the conversation may quieten down, notch down a little bit in 2021 as far as the B word Brexit is concerned.
Well, that's so really it is truly a new year going to be starting off in Britain. Chris Mason, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.